The former principal private secretary to Sir Edward Heath, Lord Armstrong, has sprung to his defence in a letter to The Times. In 35 years of knowing Sir Edward, he says, "I never detected a whiff of sexuality in relation to women, men or children." Lord Armstrong says allegations of child abuse, once subjected to scrutiny, evaporate into thin air.
A former brothel madam has told The Sun that she used to provide male escorts to Sir Edward Heath, who's being investigated by police over claims of historical child sexual abuse. In what the paper calls an exclusive interview, Myra Ford describes the former Prime Minister as a lonely gay man, but insists she never sent him children. Writing in the Express, the former Conservative Home Office Minister Anne Widdecombe says there's no evidence that Sir Edward was a paedophile and argues that in appealing for information outside his house, the police must have known that they would attract the usual crop of fantasists, revenge seekers and money chasers.
More than a dozen police forces are now known to be investigating or assessing allegations of historical child abuse made against Sir Edward Heath. It follows an appeal for information made last week by Wiltshire Police. But a close friend of Sir Edward told this programme it was disgraceful for officers to name the former Prime Minister as a potential suspect. The former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Armstrong, said he regarded the allegations as insubstantial and unsupported, and he argued they should be investigated without any publicity. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent, Tom Simons.
The appeal for information about alleged child abuse involving Sir Edward Heath by Wiltshire Police last week has triggered police inquiries across the country. Nothing further has been said about the credibility of the information received. But Lord Armstrong, who worked closely with Sir Edward as Principal Private Secretary between 1970 and 1974, believes the allegations are insubstantial, and he said that the former Prime Minister should not have been named. He pointed out that the Metropolitan Police had not revealed that Sir Edward was the subject of some of the allegations it has received. Lord Armstrong said during his life Sir Edward was protected by an officer in his house and one or two at the gate, and he felt it was very unlikely that he would have been able to secretly access children.
Judges have insisted that the former Labour MP Lord Janner must attend a court hearing to face historical child sex abuse charges. The peer could be arrested if he fails to appear in person at Westminster Magistrates' Court today. His lawyers had argued it was barbaric, inhumane and uncivilised to force him to attend, as he was suffering from severe dementia, but the High Court ruled there was a strong public interest in his attendance.
The headlines have been swirling around Sir Edward Heath in recent days. The former Prime Minister, who died in 2005, has been drawn into the national debate on child sexual abuse, with a number of police forces saying that they are investigating unspecified allegations. His life is therefore back in the spotlight. The bachelor Prime Minister, a man of passions for music and for sailing, but despite his prominence in politics and public life for decades, an intensely private figure too. Robert Armstrong, later Lord Armstrong, became a close friend after he became Principal Private Secretary in the Prime Minister's office when Ted Heath came to power in 1970. Robert Armstrong later became Cabinet Secretary and head of the Civil Service, and their friendship lasted until the end of Heath's life. I've been speaking to Lord Armstrong about the allegations made against the former Prime Minister, how the police have dealt with them, and the wider inquiry into sex abuse. First, Ted Heath and the claim made against him.
I totally believe that it's untrue. You can't prove a negative, can you? But it seemed to be so totally uncharacteristic and so unlikely that I didn't believe it to be true, and I wondered what the source, the reliability of the source was.
Have you had any communication from any police force? Because you were very close to Sir Edward as a friend and advisor over many years, suggesting whether the information is credible or not. Have you any way of judging whether there is any credibility that can be attached to the accusations that have been made?
I've heard nothing from the police at all, and so my incredulity is based on what I know about the way of life of the man and about his character and his personality.
Before we come to those matters, are you surprised that the police haven't been in touch with you, given the fact that you were Principal Private Secretary at Number 10, and then through your years in Whitehall subsequently, you maintained a very close friendship with Sir Edward, which everybody knew? Are you surprised that they haven't been in touch with you?
I'd not thought about it like that, Jim. I don't think I was surprised, no.
But it is rather odd that, for example, there was a press conference, effectively a press conference, an announcement made outside Sir Edward's house. Did that surprise you?
Yes, it did. I thought it was disgraceful.
Does that extend to the way this whole thing has been handled by the police?
I think that the Metropolitan Police have shown how you should handle it. Clearly, they have had allegations reported to them, they've investigated them, and have decided that there was nothing to them, but they have not gone public with all that. They've done that as it should be done in private. Clearly, when criminal offences of this kind have been committed, they ought to be investigated. But I think that the way that this particular matter has been handled, partly by the police, partly by the media, because the allegations are so unspecific and unsubstantial, that should have been done in private. And I think that the publicity for all this has been against justice and unfair.
You mentioned practical questions about the way Sir Edward lived his life as Prime Minister and subsequently, and then your personal reflections on him as a man. On the practical front, what makes you convinced that, as a practical matter, in your view, this was unlikely?
I think, Jim, it was very unlikely. When he was at home in Salisbury, he had two policemen, two Wiltshire. He had the personal protection officer from Scotland Yard in the house, people always in the house. He never drove a car himself. He always had an official driver. And it just seems to me highly unlikely that he could have escaped all that to do the kind of thing that is described. The kind of thing which is, as I say, completely uncharacteristic.
Well, you say uncharacteristic. What is it about the character that you knew that makes you believe, quite apart from the practical matters you've just discussed, that this, in your view, doesn't ring true?
Well, I knew him for 35 years. I worked very closely with him while he was Prime Minister, and we remained friends for the rest of his life, as I saw quite a lot of him. And as you know how it is, you usually detect some sense of sexuality when you have a constabulary policeman on the gate, at least one and sometimes two, when you are with people or if you are friends with them or you work closely with them. I had never felt a whiff of sexuality about Ted Heath.
Of any
whether
kind?
It was in relation to, whether it was in relation to women or men or children. None at all. I think he was, as Philip Ziegler describes him in the biography, I think he was completely asexual. There are some people like that. There are not many of them, I don't think, but there clearly are, and I think he was one of them.
I think he probably was a sexless man, an asexual man. He never showed any interest in either men or women. There were allegations that he liked surrounding himself on his boat with nice young men, but there was never any ground for any sort of sexual impropriety.
But that's not what the police watchdog announced today.
It is alleged that a criminal prosecution was not pursued when a person threatened to expose that Sir Edward Heath may have been involved in offences concerning children. In addition to this allegation, the IPCC will examine whether Wiltshire Police subsequently took any steps to investigate these claims.
Was it ever a subject you discussed with him?
Not at all, no. The matter never came up. I knew that he had a girlfriend when he was young, before the war and then during the war, and I knew that he kept the photograph of that girlfriend by his bed for the rest of his life. I came to the conclusion that he had never felt sure enough of being able to provide for her, to propose marriage to her. She'd gone off and got married to somebody else, and he determined never to be treated like that again.
For Heath himself, nothing made him more awkward than discussing his private life. Broadcaster Michael Cockrell tried, asking him about the woman he might have married.
But why did you not get married?
Because she decided she'd marry somebody else.
And what? Do you think she was tired of waiting?
Well, I don't know. We won't discuss that.
Why not?
Well, because I don't want to discuss the private lives of people who are either with us or be embarrassed, or no longer with us and embarrasses their family.
But were you sad when you learnt that she married someone else?
Yes.
Did you get over it, do you think?
Yes.
Has it said that you kept her picture by your bedside for a long time thereafter?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes.
When you were working in Number 10, and subsequently, were any allegations made of any kind concerning him that were serious enough to be reported to the authorities?
None at all. I don't remember any such allegations.
You see, it's interesting because, as you know, this whole issue, post-Jimmy Savile, has spread very widely. And there are a lot of people who believe that somehow the establishment, in some of its forms, was covering up for some people. Not talking about Ted Heath at this moment, more generally. Now, you were, in effect, at the heart of that establishment for many years as Cabinet Secretary. Would you have passed to the police any credible information about anyone in the government, high or low, suggesting wrongdoing?
If I had thought there was a criminal offence being committed, then I should have certainly reported that.
Did you ever find yourself in that position?
I don't remember doing so, no.
And when you have read and heard some of the accusations,
I remember leaks. There was a leak of information where there was a possibility of bringing in the police, but that, of course, has nothing to do with this.
But when you hear these allegations that there was somewhere in the depths of Whitehall or Westminster a ring of people who were engaged in illegal activity and who covered up for each other and who were perhaps helped by some people in authority, what's your reaction to that?
Well, I don't think it's impossible. I wasn't aware of it at the time.
Did you ever hear any rumours to that effect?
I think certainly not while I was Heath's Principal Private Secretary. I don't remember any such allegations then.
There was also the now infamous question of Geoffrey Dickens, Conservative backbencher at the time, and his dossier, which seems to have gone missing. I mean, when you look back on those years and you hear these things, do you worry that there was stuff which just disappeared under the radar and should have been looked at?
I don't remember thinking like that at the time at all.
It has been reported, and it's worth giving you just an opportunity to confirm this, that you recommended that Jimmy Savile shouldn't receive a knighthood during the Thatcher period because you were concerned about some things that had been said where he talked about having sex with women and charity things and so on. Is that true? Did you urge caution?
I did suggest to Margaret Thatcher that it would be better not to give him a knighthood, yes.
On those grounds?
The grounds were not as specific as that. It was just there was a general sense around that things around Jimmy Savile weren't quite as they should be. I can't say that there were specific allegations which caused me to write, but there was a sense in which it would be taking a risk which she didn't need to take.
When you read what's being said now about the need to investigate any allegation, how do you balance that, which is clearly in the public interest, that allegations should be investigated properly, with your feeling in relation to Ted Heath that the police, in your view, behaved wrongly by going public on the fact they were investigating without revealing what the accusations were? How do you balance those two things, the need for proper scrutiny and the fact that you feel that this one wasn't handled well?
Yeah, I think that allegations which appear to be credible of criminal offences should be investigated, of course. But I think that when the allegations are so insubstantial or so unsupported as these are, that investigation should take place in private, and they shouldn't be publicised in the way it has been here. I think that's been very remiss. Well, I think that's where the Metropolitan Police got it right. They pursued the investigations, but they didn't publicise it.
Among those who have died, there's another prominent figure who is frequently mentioned in this context and, of course, cannot defend himself. Leon Britton, who was, of course, one time Home Secretary and Trade Secretary when you were Cabinet Secretary. Do you feel similarly in that case as you do in the Ted Heath case?
Well, I didn't know Leon Britton as well as I knew Ted, of course. He wasn't, in that sense, a close friend. But yes, I did. I thought that, once again, the allegations should have been investigated without media involvement, unless it reached the point where criminal charges were going to be made. Then, of course, it has to be public.
Did those allegations come as a surprise to you?
They did, yes. I had not thought that. I had not thought of him in that context at all.
We're clearly in the midst of a proper inquiry which has been set up by the government into all sorts of aspects of child abuse in the aftermath of the Savile affair, and that will take its time. What kind of investigation should that be, and what's necessary, do you think, to assure the public that this is going to be done properly, and if stables need to be cleaned, they are cleaned?
Well, I think that inquiry has got to go ahead, no holds barred, and what the chairman has said suggests that is going to happen. My fear is that this is going to take a very long time, and that it will make Chilcot and Savile look like easy money.
Lord Armstrong, thank you very much.
And we heard at 8:10 the former Cabinet Secretary, Lord Armstrong, describing Edward Heath as asexual. And the suggestion was that, particularly in the old days, as it were, decades ago, you could be asexual and be left alone. We live now, though, in a world in which sexual imagery is everywhere, and the pressure to take part, as it were, is huge. And yet there are people who don't feel sexually attracted to anyone. Jenny Goodchild is one of them. She is on the line from Bristol, and Joseph Delap is actually finishing a PhD in asexual studies at the Open University, and also joins us. Morning to you both.
Hi.
Morning.
Jenny Goodchild, first of all, tell us about your own feelings about your own knowledge of yourself, as it were. How did you come to a point where you understood for yourself that you didn't have sexual attraction to people and you didn't want to have it?
So it took quite a while because so I'm 24 now, and when I first started figuring it out was as a teenager, and there just wasn't as much out there. But I think like the key kind of moment I realised it was something I should look into is I had a friend in college, and we both had boyfriends at the time, and she was quite Catholic, and she was talking to me about, really struggling with the urge to have sex with her boyfriend, and I just didn't get it at all. I was just incredibly confused that was something you might struggle with. And that's about the point that I kind of realised that the way I was not just how everyone felt, which I'd been assuming, but that actually other people got this particular set of feelings that I didn't seem to have access to. And then kind of from there, I kind of did a bit of Googling around. I had some friends who were in the queer community who vaguely had some ideas to point me the right way, and I kind of figured out what the word was when I was like 18. And kind of went from there, really.
And are you comfortable with it now? I mean, does it cause you distress, or does it cause you happiness, or neither? Have you just put it completely to one side?
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of, when I first started figuring it out, it was quite important, but now it's just kind of a thing that kind of exists in the background, like, kind of, it sounds weird, but I'd compare it to like food preferences. Like, they obviously would impact aspects of your life, but you wouldn't necessarily have it as the key centre point or anything like that.
And Joseph Delap, those feelings, that sense of herself that Jenny Goodchild describes there, how commonly is that felt?
I think it's much more common than people actually think. There was a survey done in Britain, the NADSL, in 1994, which is the National Survey on Sexual Attitudes and Lifestyles, and it was estimated that roughly about 1%, just over 1% of the people who responded to that, and it was in a national survey, stated that they didn't feel sexual attraction towards other people. And that's actually been pretty consistent in most sex research that's been done over the last 50, 60 the last 5-6 decades, actually. I mean, even Alfred Kinsey's work that he did in the 1950s, he had a group of people who responded, and they were about 1.5% of the people who responded said they didn't want to have sex with other people, and he didn't really know what to do with them. He called them population X, and he kind of crossed them out and made them invisible from his research.
And the point is, it's not people who are not having sex, it's people who actually don't want to have sex. I mean, there is a difference.
It's kind of the distinction between celibacy and asexuality, which is that celibates are choosing not to have sex, maybe for short periods or for extended periods. Asexuals are people who either feel no sexual attraction or feel low sexual attraction, and that's an orientation.
How does it? How do you? Yeah,
Can I add something on that? One important thing to note is because obviously you can have sex without having sexual attraction to a person. So what confuses a lot of people is that not all asexual people are celibate. Because, I don't know, if you want children, it's probably the easiest way. If you really care about your partner and you're not that bothered by it. So that's another thing that tends to kind of throw a spanner in the works, is that not all asexual people are celibate, and many celibate people aren't asexual.
Have you had trouble finding someone to be close to, Jenny, who can accept the way you are?
I've been with my partner for about 4 years now, and I told him before we got together, and we found it pretty okay, actually. But it can be tricky finding the right sort of person. I was lucky that my partner was quite immersed in sort of queer community, so he didn't instantly go, oh gosh, what's that? But even then, it takes a lot of communication to have a relationship with somebody who isn't asexual, I would say.
Well, Jenny Goodshaw, thank you very much for talking to us this morning, and Joseph Delap as well. Thank you to you both.